Thanks very much, Gordon, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back in the RIETI building today. My topic is to talk about the 5G technology, and I'm using that to illustrate some of the points that have already been made today. As you know, all the expectations about 5G technology is that it will be transformative. It will have significant effects on our economy. It could be the driver of driverless cars, for instance. But also, in Gordon's terms, it's a dual-use technology. It has significant defence applications, and furthermore, because of its ubiquity in the telecommunications system, it creates more opportunities for intrusion, disruption, and creating new opportunities for adversaries. So for all of these reasons, the application of that technology has attracted a lot of attention from members of the security community, which apparently has been driving some policy choices in a number of countries. I refer here, for example, to the choice by the US and other economies, Australia and Japan, to contain the participation of the Chinese firm Huawei in the rollout of this technology. The case of Australia is interesting to see the argument that was made. The press release announcing the policy to ban vendors who are likely to be subject to directions from a foreign government, Huawei was not named in that press release, but it was the target of it, said that traditional telecommunications networks had a core and an edge or a periphery. But 5G, the press release went on to say, is different. It's much more distributed, it has many possible points of contact. So it offers, as I said, more opportunities for intrusion. The Australian government concluded that it could find no combination of technical security controls that sufficiently mitigated the risk. It went on to say that therefore the participation of vendors who are likely to be subject to these directions from a foreign government would not meet its expectations of the management of risks in the telecommunications system. So the use of a risk-based approach, which we're talking about today, led Australian decision makers to a corner solution, that is, to a ban. But opinions differ on the scope for more precise risk management in this area. So, as Gordon mentioned, a risk management approach to thinking about this would be, well, what are the risks? How can we manage them? Regulate very precisely if that is the efficient thing to do, but consider other options. Other options, there might be market-orientated options too, multi-vendor options, for example. We should also consider the application of other institutions, our legal system, for instance, laws around privacy and their application. There's quite a large toolbox, again, as Gordon explains in his paper, for responding to these issues. So it seems to me that it's not foregone when you take this way of thinking that new regulation is the answer, and it's not certain that a ban, as applied by the US and others, is going to be efficient. More likely, it seems to me, that when you're considering the trade-offs between the security benefits and the economic consequences, you'd be led to some sort of middle position. And some people call this middle position a small yard high fence strategy. That is, pick the problem and then deal with it forcefully and directly. Economies in Europe seem to be following this approach, the UK and Germany in particular. In Canada, though, it's interesting, there seems to be a struggle going on between government agencies, one of whom says, look, the risks can be managed very precisely and carefully, and a ban or a corner solution is not the answer. Others say, no, they cannot be managed and we have to go to the corner. That debate still seems to be in progress. Others are much more concerned about the benefits of access to the Chinese technology. It is very good. It is world leading according to industry reports that I've seen using a number of indicators. And many economies are reluctant to give up that opportunity to have access to that technology, and there are many examples of that way of thinking in Southeast Asia. Now, Australian officials, I guess, would say to me at this point, we agree with you. We agree. That's what we did. We looked at the risks. But they said when we did that, we ended up in the corner because of our view of the consequences of intrusion. That's why we made the choice that we did. But still, you know, being stuck in the corner is not a good place to be. It's not a good outcome. It's costly, and as Gordon explained, it seems to me too that the lack of engagement which the corner involves also creates another set of risks which are important to consider, the losses of opportunity in engagement. So, as I mentioned, other countries take a different view of this trade-off, and to make progress, I suggest, it's useful to think about what a cooperative approach would be, because it would create some more policy space in which we could operate. So if we can go to the heart of the matter with our trading partners, talk about the nature of these risks, then it seems to me we can find our way out of the corner. There is scope for cooperation, I would suggest, including with China, because if you look at the Chinese legislation, yes, not the intelligence law, but the other Chinese legislation related to their own concerns about cybersecurity, it looks to me there is a basis for a conversation there, and there are institutions in the region in which we could manage that conversation, APEC in particular, which Gordon mentioned. So I mentioned the US earlier. Let me say a little bit more about what's happening there. The US earlier in the year announced bans on both sales to Huawei and purchases from it. Its concerns were reported to be that they wanted to protect US technology, but I would say that this is also done in a wider context where there's a concern about the growth of China, and so there's a strategic component to this objective. With respect to the import ban, like the Australians too, the US wanted to avoid being exposed to decisions by what it regarded as an adversary government. Now, the ban on the exports involved the inclusion of Huawei in what's called the entity list. So any sale to that entity requires a license. But then the US issued a temporary general license to cover sales that were involved in keeping going existing networks. And indeed, as you probably saw, that general license was extended for the second time? No, for the third time, just last Monday. On the import side, the President announced the ban, but the Department of Commerce was supposed to come up with regulations to say how it would be implemented. And they still haven't done that. Well over 150 days they were given to do so. I wonder if there's a couple of different explanations of this outcome. That is, a lot of talk about disengagement, but actually not so much action. One is, I'll call it Canada scenario. There could well be a strong debate going on amongst the US agencies about how to operate here. Do we adopt a ban, for example, or do we adopt a more targeted and specific approach? I suggest this debate is also amplified by a whole lot of domestic interests in the United States, including the business sector, but also rural wireless operators who are actually keen users of Huawei equipment. The other view is that the processes are actually deliberately being linked and driven by the trade negotiations with China. In other words, what's happened is that a threat of an imposition of a constraint has been put in place, something which might be softened if progress is made in other areas. Some business commentators are rightly, it seems to me, appalled by this connection because they argue that if the regulatory structure is designed as an outcome of a bargaining process, then there's no confidence that the policy actually deals with the issue. And furthermore, there'll be uncertainty about its application and longevity because of the lack of a sound basis of its design. So to summarise, I have spoken about both export bans and import bans in relation to the use of Huawei equipment. I think both are costly options, and they're illustrations of the impact of what Shiro called the geoeconomics way of thinking. The use of the import ban follows, I suggest, from the consideration of the management of risks in a 5G world, but undertaken without cooperation, which you've also considered would create more options and a less costly result. The pursuit, however, of a cooperative approach is constrained by the weight put on the strategic considerations and the presumption that to not engage with a particular adversary is the way out, the way to deal with them. The use of the export ban is also clearly costly in the short term and even possibly contradictory to its stated intentions in the long run. Apparently driven by strategic intentions, it's another example of the consequences of the geoeconomics way of thinking, which essentially leads to an inefficient allocation of instruments, here economic instruments, to targets, in this case, strategic ones. Thank you very much.